While many people pour their emotions into sports games, holding their breath at every play and letting the final result affect their mood, there is a group of people who feel absolutely nothing. No excitement, no disappointment, no anticipation. For them, sports are simply events happening outside their personal emotional life. If you belong to this group, you may have been labeled boring or lacking passion, but the truth is, not caring about sports says nothing negative about who you are. Psychology shows that each brain searches for meaning in different ways. Some people respond strongly to competition and team identity. Others connect more deeply with music, ideas, relationships, or quiet moments. Society often treats loving sports as normal and indifference as strange, but the brain does not operate by majority rule. If you are not drawn into sports, you may simply be living and experiencing life in a different way, and that is completely valid. When we look more deeply into human psychology, the important question is not who is right or wrong, but why some people care about sports so intensely. Humans naturally carry a strong instinct for group belonging. Throughout history, being part of a group was essential for survival. Today, sports have quietly become a modern version of that sense of belonging. When someone supports a team they love, the brain releases chemicals that create feelings of connection and familiarity. This makes them feel part of something larger than themselves. Victory brings shared joy, while defeat creates collective empathy. For many people, this is a very real emotional experience. But not every brain responds strongly to this kind of connection. Some people do not need a sense of group belonging to feel whole. They build their identity more from their inner world, their values, and their personal sources of meaning. And that is why sports do not reach them in the same way. And the story does not end with the sense of belonging. When someone follows sports, their brain also reacts strongly to anticipation and uncertainty. Every play, every close moment triggers the expectation of an outcome. This state of waiting creates a continuous stream of emotion, sometimes tense, sometimes euphoric, sometimes deflating. For many people, this is what makes sports so captivating. However, not everyone experiences the same level of response from these indirect experiences. Some brains do not find emotional reward in simply standing on the sidelines, watching others win or lose. Rather than being drawn in by random drama, they find it difficult to connect with an outcome they have no ability to influence. This does not reflect a lack of emotion, but a difference in how the brain prioritizes meaning. Some people need direct involvement to feel fulfilled, situations where their actions genuinely make a difference. And this is a key distinction between being deeply absorbed in sports and feeling completely indifferent to them. From this point, the difference begins to shape how each person sees themselves. For many sports fans, personal emotions become tightly linked to the results of the team they support. When the team wins, they feel proud. When the team loses, they feel disappointed, as if they themselves have lost something. This feeling comes from identifying the self with a story that exists outside the individual. In contrast, people who are indifferent to sports tend to attach less of their self-worth to outcomes beyond their control. They do not need to borrow someone else's victory to feel successful. As a result, their sense of self is often more stable, less influenced by events that are not directly connected to their own actions. This stability is not coldness or emotional detachment. It simply reflects a different way of building self-esteem, one grounded in experiences they actively participate in and create, rather than stories observed from the outside. However, this does not mean that people who are indifferent to sports are less empathetic. In reality, they simply allocate their emotions differently. Every person has a limited emotional capacity for deeply engaging with the world around them. For sports fans, a large portion of that capacity is directed toward their team, the narrative of winning and losing, and the journey of the athletes. Meanwhile, those who do not care about sports tend to direct their empathy and attention elsewhere. It may flow toward personal relationships, social issues, art, creativity, or intellectual questions. They still experience strong emotions, they just do not place them on the same object. This difference can sometimes make the two groups misunderstand each other, but in truth, both are seeking meaning, connection, and a sense of aliveness, simply through very different paths. Because they allocate emotions differently, these two groups also differ in how they search for meaning. For sports fans, meaning often lives in the story. Dramatic comebacks, underdogs winning, and unpredictable seasons create a powerful narrative that keeps unfolding. This is how they experience life, through shared collective stories. In contrast, people who are indifferent to sports often find that randomness disconnected from their own lived reality. They question why they should invest emotion in an outcome they cannot influence. Instead, they look for meaning in experiences that involve direct participation, where personal effort leads to tangible change. Neither approach is higher or better than the other. They are simply two different paths through which people experience the value of life. From these different ways of finding meaning, the way each person invests emotion becomes clearer. Sports fans often attach their emotions to one-way relationships, where they observe, support, and empathize with the journeys of others. Even without direct participation, they still feel part of the story. Meanwhile, people who are not drawn to sports tend to prioritize two-way interactions. They want their emotions to create real impact, whether in a personal relationship, an individual project, or a long-term goal. Simply watching from the outside does not give them a sense of fulfillment. This difference explains why the same event can feel deeply important to one person and completely insignificant to another. And it says nothing about anyone's worth, it simply reflects how each person connects with life. When they do not invest heavily in external stories, many people who are indifferent to sports experience life at a different rhythm. They're less likely to be pulled into emotional swings that last for hours just to follow someone else's outcome. Instead, their attention is more focused on what is happening within their own personal lives. This often makes them feel more present in everyday experiences. Their time and energy are directed toward learning, creating, nurturing relationships, or simply observing the world at a slower pace. For them, a sense of aliveness does not come from brief emotional peaks, but from sustained engagement with what they are actually doing. This presence is sometimes mistaken for social detachment. In reality, it reflects a different way of living deeply, one that places personal experience at the center. Because they live at this rhythm, many people who are indifferent to sports gradually realize that they are not missing out on any fundamental human experience. They simply choose not to place their emotions on games whose outcomes lie beyond their personal influence. Instead, they invest in challenges they face themselves, choices they are responsible for, and journeys that have a direct impact on their own lives. This can sometimes create distance in social interactions. When the familiar question about last night's game comes up, they may fall silent or steer the conversation away. But that silence is not empty. It reflects a different value system, one where meaning does not come from watching others struggle and compete, but from walking one's own path and experiencing life firsthand. And with this understanding, the feeling of being out of place is gradually replaced by a calmer sense of self-acceptance. In the end, the most important thing to remember is that not caring about sports says nothing negative about who you are. It simply shows that your brain, emotions, and value system are oriented in a different way. You find meaning in experiences that involve real participation, in relationships, work, ideas, and journeys you actively live through each day. There is no single correct way to experience life. There are only different paths that lead to a sense of wholeness. When you understand and accept how you connect with the world, you spend less time comparing yourself to others and less time doubting yourself. If this perspective made you feel understood, take a moment to reflect on where you are placing your emotional energy. And if you would like to keep exploring human psychology through a calm and thoughtful lens, consider following the channel and sharing your thoughts in the comments.